Rome, the mightiest civilization the world had ever known, stood trembling on the edge of complete collapse. For decades, blood had stained the marble steps of the Forum. Warlords fought brutal civil wars, while ordinary Romans cowered behind locked doors, wondering if their beloved republic would survive another sunrise. Then, from this chaos, emerged a young man barely out of his teens. His name was Octavian, and he possessed something far more dangerous than any sword or legion, an almost supernatural understanding of human nature and political theater. This wasn't just another ambitious Roman seeking power. No, this was a master manipulator who would pull off the greatest political magic trick in history. Here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Augustus didn't conquer Rome through violence like so many before him. Instead, he performed what historians call the most brilliant sleight of hand ever witnessed. He convinced an entire empire that he was saving their cherished republic while secretly burying it 6 feet under. The Romans didn't just accept this transformation, they celebrated it, they cheered for it, they practically begged him to take more power. Think about that for a moment. How do you destroy a 500-year-old democracy and have people thank you for it? How do you become the most powerful man in the known world while maintaining the illusion that you're just a humble public servant? Augustus figured it out, and his methods were so effective that they became the blueprint for every clever dictator who followed. But here's the question that should keep us all awake at night. Was Augustus truly Rome's savior, rescuing the empire from certain destruction? Or was he history's most sophisticated con artist, a wolf in sheep's clothing who traded Roman freedom for stability and order? The answer might be more complicated and more chilling than you think. What we're about to uncover together is the story of how one man's genius and ambition didn't just change Rome, it changed the entire course of human civilization. Augustus created a system of government so durable, so cleverly disguised, that it would dominate the Western world for over 1,500 years. Every emperor, every king, every autocrat who came after him studied his playbook. The transformation Augustus orchestrated was so complete, so masterfully executed, that most Romans never even realized they were witnessing the death of their republic. They thought they were watching its rebirth. And that, my friends, is the mark of true political genius, or depending on your perspective, the most dangerous kind of tyranny imaginable. Want to discover how this incredible historical turning point changed the course of civilization forever? How one man's calculated moves created an empire that would shape everything from our laws to our architecture to our very concept of leadership? Then you're in exactly the right place. Stay with us as we dive deep into this fascinating story, and don't forget to subscribe to Imperium Chronicles for more epic tales from history's most pivotal moments. Hit that like button, share this with your fellow history lovers, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another incredible story from the ancient world. Trust me, what you're about to learn will completely change how you see power, politics, and the delicate balance between freedom and security. Picture this. Rome in the 1st century before Christ was like a magnificent palace crumbling from within. The greatest civilization the world had ever seen was literally tearing itself apart, and the streets that once echoed with triumphant marches now ran red with the blood of civil war. You see, the Roman Republic wasn't just having a bad decade. It was dying a slow, agonizing death that had been building for generations. The very system that had made Rome the master of the Mediterranean was now strangling it like a noose around its own neck. Let me paint you a picture of just how chaotic things had become. The Roman Senate, once the most respected governing body in the ancient world, had turned into something closer to a gentleman's club for the wealthy elite. These senators, who were supposed to represent the best interests of Rome, were more interested in lining their own pockets than actually governing. Corruption wasn't just common, it was practically the admission fee to Roman politics. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Republic's death didn't happen overnight. It was more like watching a slow-motion train wreck that took decades to unfold. The real catalyst came with the rise of what historians call the strongmen. Powerful military commanders who realized that loyalty from soldiers could be bought with promises of land and loot, not patriotic speeches about Roman honor. Enter our cast of characters: Pompey the Great, Marcus Crassus, and of course, Julius Caesar. These three men formed what we call the First Triumvirate around 60 before Christ, basically an unofficial agreement to carve up the Roman world between themselves. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a corporate merger, except instead of companies, they were trading provinces and armies. Now, Pompey was already a legend by this point. They called him the Great for a reason. He'd conquered more territory than almost any Roman before him. But here's a fascinating detail most people don't know. Pompey was actually terrified of public speaking. This man who could command legions in battle would literally shake when he had to address the Senate. Ironic, isn't it? Then there was Crassus, the richest man in Rome. And when I say rich, I mean obscenely wealthy. This guy literally owned his own fire department. He'd show up when your house was burning, offer to buy it at a fraction of its value, and if you refused, he'd just watch it burn to the ground. Cold-blooded? Absolutely. Effective? Unfortunately, yes. But the real game changer was Julius Caesar. This man was a political genius wrapped in a military mastermind's body. While Pompey and Crassus were content to play by the old rules, even if they bent them, Caesar was writing entirely new ones. He understood something that would prove prophetic. In a dying republic, the person who controls the armies controls everything. The breaking point came when this unstable alliance finally collapsed. Crassus got himself killed fighting the Parthians in 53 before Christ. And legend has it, they poured molten gold down his throat as a symbol of his greed. With Crassus gone, it was just Pompey versus Caesar, and Rome wasn't big enough for both of them. What followed was a civil war that would make modern conflicts look like playground disputes. Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in 49 before Christ. And yes, that's where we get the phrase crossing the Rubicon, meaning there's no turning back. He marched on Rome itself, and Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated on a beach. Caesar had won, but at what cost? Here's the thing, though. Caesar's victory didn't bring peace. If anything, it made things worse. The old Republican institutions were now completely hollow shells. Caesar tried to reform the system, but he made one crucial mistake. He got comfortable. He started accepting divine honors, wearing purple robes, and sitting on a golden chair in the Senate. To the remaining Republicans, he looked less like a reformer and more like a king. And that's when everything exploded on the Ides of March, 44 before Christ. 23 stab wounds later, Julius Caesar lay bleeding to death at the foot of Pompey's statue. The ultimate irony. The senators thought they were saving the Republic, but they'd actually delivered its death blow. The aftermath was absolute chaos. Rome erupted into another civil war, this one even more vicious than the last. But here's where our story takes its most dramatic turn. From the political wreckage emerged a young man barely out of his teens. Caesar's great-nephew and adopted heir, Gaius Octavius, who would later become known simply as Octavian. This 18-year-old kid had just inherited the most dangerous legacy in Roman history: Caesar's name, Caesar's money, and Caesar's enemies. Most people thought he'd be dead within a year. After all, what could a teenager do against seasoned politicians and battle-hardened generals? But Octavian had something his enemies underestimated: patience, cunning, and an almost supernatural ability to read people. While everyone else was fighting over Caesar's corpse, Octavian was quietly building his own power base. He understood that in the chaos of a dying republic, the person who appeared most reasonable, most stable, most normal, would ultimately win. The stage was now set for the final act of the Roman Republic's tragedy. The old world was dead, but what would replace it? That, my friends, is where our story of Augustus truly begins. With a young man standing in the ashes of 5 centuries of Republican tradition, about to build something entirely new from the ruins. The Republic was bleeding out, and everyone knew it. The question wasn't whether it would die. The question was who would control what came next. Picture this. A young man, barely 19 years old, suddenly discovers he's the heir to the most powerful man in Rome. But there's a catch. That man, Julius Caesar, lies dead on the Senate floor, stabbed 23 times by his own friends. This is where our story truly begins, with Octavian stepping into a world of blood, betrayal, and brutal ambition. Now here's something fascinating that most people don't know. When Octavian first heard about Caesar's assassination, he wasn't even in Rome. He was studying rhetoric in Greece, probably worrying about his homework rather than conquering the world. But fate, as they say, had other plans. The moment he learned that Caesar had adopted him as his son and heir, everything changed. This wasn't just about inheriting money. He was inheriting enemies, allies, and a legacy written in blood. But Octavian was different from every other power-hungry Roman. While others grabbed swords and marched armies, he grabbed something far more powerful: the narrative. He understood that in politics, perception is everything. Caesar's assassins called themselves liberators, saving Rome from tyranny. Octavian flipped the script entirely. He painted them as murderers who had killed Rome's greatest hero, and himself as the righteous avenger. Here's where it gets really clever. Instead of immediately declaring himself dictator like everyone expected, Octavian played the long game. He formed the second triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus in 43 before Christ. On paper, they were supposed to share power equally. In reality, Octavian was already planning how to eliminate both of them without looking like the villain. The triumvirate's first act was terrifying. They published death lists called prescriptions. Imagine waking up one morning and finding your name posted on a board in the forum, marking you for execution. Thousands died, including the great orator Cicero, whose head and hands were nailed to the speaker's platform as a warning. But here's the brilliant part. While Antony and Lepidus got their hands dirty with the killings, Octavian positioned himself as the reluctant participant, the one who was forced into violence by circumstances. As the years passed, Octavian systematically dismantled his partners. Lepidus was the easier target, stripped of his provinces and sent into comfortable retirement. But Mark Antony? That was a master stroke of propaganda warfare that would make modern spin doctors weep with envy. Antony had fallen in love with Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Now, this wasn't just any romance. This was political dynamite. Octavian seized on this relationship and turned it into Rome's greatest scandal. He didn't attack Antony directly. Instead, he attacked the idea of Antony. Through carefully crafted messages and whispered rumors, he painted Antony as a man bewitched by a foreign queen, someone who had abandoned Roman values for Egyptian luxury. The propaganda campaign was ruthless and brilliant. Octavian spread stories about Antony dressing like an Egyptian god, about secret plans to move Rome's capital to Alexandria, about how Cleopatra had unmanned the once great Roman general. Whether these stories were true didn't matter. They felt true to ordinary Romans who were already suspicious of foreign influences. Then came the moment that would decide everything, the Battle of Actium in 31 before Christ. But here's what's fascinating. This wasn't really a battle at all. It was a surrender disguised as a naval engagement. When Cleopatra saw that defeat was inevitable, she sailed away with her ships. Antony, faced with the choice between his love and his honor, chose love and followed her. His remaining forces, leaderless and demoralized, simply gave up. Octavian had won without firing a shot. More importantly, he had eliminated his greatest rival while looking like the defender of Roman honor. But the most brilliant move was yet to come. After Actium, Octavian could have declared himself emperor immediately. Rome was his after all. But instead, he did something unprecedented. He went home and waited. For an entire year, he did nothing dramatic. He simply governed efficiently, restored order, and let the people experience peace after decades of civil war. This is where Octavian's genius truly shines. He understood that Romans didn't want another king. They had spent 5 centuries hating kings. But they were exhausted by chaos. So he gave them exactly what they didn't know they wanted: stability wrapped in familiar Republican language. When he finally made his move in 27 before Christ, it was presented as a gift to the Roman people. Standing before the Senate, Octavian announced that he was returning all his extraordinary powers to the Republic. The crisis was over, he declared. Rome was restored. He was just a simple citizen now, ready to retire to private life. Of course, this was political theater at its finest. The Senate, packed with his supporters and terrified of returning to civil war, practically begged him to stay. They granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and gave him control over the most important provinces. They thought they were honoring him. In reality, they were crowning him emperor while pretending to preserve the Republic. This is what made Augustus so dangerous and so successful. He didn't destroy Roman institutions. He hollowed them out from within. The Senate still met, but only discussed what he allowed them to discuss. Elections still happened, but only his candidates won. Citizens still had rights, but only the rights he chose to protect. The elimination of his rivals was equally masterful. Those who opposed him didn't die in dramatic executions. They simply faded away. Some were offered comfortable retirements in distant provinces. Others found themselves assigned to impossible tasks in dangerous regions. A few simply disappeared, victims of convenient accidents or sudden illnesses. Augustus's hands remained clean while his enemies vanished one by one. By the time people realized what had happened, it was too late. The Republic was dead, but it had died so quietly that most Romans didn't even notice. They were too busy enjoying the peace, prosperity, and stability that Augustus provided. He had achieved what every dictator dreams of, making people grateful for their chains. This, my friends, is how you conquer a civilization without conquering it at all. Augustus didn't just win Rome. He convinced Rome to surrender itself willingly. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying victory in all of human history. In 27 before Christ, Rome witnessed one of history's most brilliant political performances. Octavian, standing before the Senate, declared he was returning all his emergency powers back to the people. The senators applauded, believing democracy had been restored. But this was all carefully staged theater. On that very same day, the Senate bestowed upon him a name that would echo through centuries: Augustus, meaning the revered one. This was no mere title. It was the culmination of a masterful plan. While pretending to restore the Republic, Augustus was actually building a monarchy hidden behind Republican facades. Think of it as the ultimate sleight of hand. He kept all the old Republican offices and institutions, but quietly gathered their powers into his own hands. He became imperator, commander of all armies. He became Pontifex Maximus, high priest of Roman religion. And most cleverly, he took the title princeps, meaning first citizen, making himself sound like just another Roman, albeit the most important one. But let me tell you how deep this transformation really went. The military? Augustus created a standing professional army, paid directly from his personal treasury. These weren't just Rome's legions anymore. They were his legions, loyal to him alone. Imagine having a personal army of over 150,000 professional soldiers scattered across the empire. The administration saw equally dramatic changes. Augustus divided the provinces into two categories: peaceful ones officially managed by the Senate, and troubled frontier regions under his direct control. Guess which provinces had all the armies? And the tax system? He completely overhauled it, creating an efficient machine that filled Rome's coffers like never before. But perhaps his most ingenious reforms were cultural. Augustus launched a moral crusade, promoting traditional Roman values and family life. He built temples, restored old monuments, and transformed Rome from a city of brick into a city of marble. The famous Pantheon's first version was one of his projects. He understood that people needed both bread and spectacle. Here's a fascinating detail few people know. Augustus even had his own postal service. He created a network of messengers who could carry his orders across the empire at unprecedented speed. Think of it as the ancient world's version of instant messaging. But this raises an intriguing question. Was Rome's fate sealed before Augustus came along? Could anyone have saved the old republic? Or was its transformation into an empire inevitable? The system had been breaking down for generations, torn apart by ambitious generals and corrupt politicians. Perhaps Augustus simply gave Rome what it needed: peace and stability, even at the cost of its democratic soul. What Augustus created was so effective that it would serve as a template for rulers for the next 15 centuries. Even today, his techniques of maintaining power while preserving democratic appearances might seem eerily familiar. The most remarkable thing about Augustus's revolution was its subtlety. No grand proclamations of empire, no crowning ceremony, just a slow, careful accumulation of power, wrapped in the comfortable clothes of tradition. Rome went to sleep a republic and woke up an empire, and most Romans never even noticed the difference. Let me tell you about one of history's most brilliant political illusions. You see, Augustus was a master of appearances, and nowhere was this more evident than in his handling of Rome's democratic institutions. Picture the Roman Senate, once the beating heart of the Republic. Augustus didn't abolish it. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he performed a much more sophisticated operation. He kept the Senate intact, like a perfectly preserved museum piece, but slowly drained it of any real authority. The senators still wore their purple-striped togas, still met to debate, still passed laws, but now they were merely acting out a play, with Augustus as both director and lead actor. Here's a fascinating detail. Augustus actually reduced the Senate's size from around 900 members to 600. He claimed this was to restore its dignity, but it really allowed him to pack it with his supporters. He even sat on a special raised platform during Senate meetings, surrounded by his most loyal friends. Imagine the psychological impact. Every senator who spoke knew they were addressing not just their peers, but their true master. The election system provides an even more intriguing example of this facade. Romans still gathered in their voting assemblies, still cast their ballots, but Augustus had already hand-picked the winners. He would simply recommend candidates, and mysteriously, these recommended individuals always won. It was democracy theater at its finest. But perhaps his most brilliant stroke was keeping the people happily distracted. Augustus understood what we might today call bread and circuses politics. He personally ensured Rome's grain supply, regularly distributed food to the poor, and sponsored magnificent games and entertainments. A well-fed, entertained populace rarely rebels. Did you know he even set up a permanent firefighting force in Rome? It made him incredibly popular while also giving him another armed force within the city. The parallels with modern times are striking. Just as Augustus maintained the appearance of democratic institutions while hollowing out their substance, we've seen similar patterns throughout history. Leaders still use popular support to justify the gradual concentration of power. They still maintain democratic facades while building authoritarian systems behind them. Augustus created a template that would be followed for centuries. Keep the traditional institutions standing, maintain the illusion of choice, and ensure the people are comfortable enough not to question the system too deeply. He understood that people will accept the loss of power as long as they don't feel its loss too keenly. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Augustus's system was how natural it felt to most Romans. They still had their Senate, their assemblies, their elections. They still called themselves a republic. The changes happened so gradually, so smoothly, that most people didn't realize their democracy had been transformed into an autocracy until it was far too late. It's a reminder of how fragile democratic systems can be, and how easily they can be undermined not through violent revolution, but through subtle manipulation of existing institutions. Augustus showed that the most effective way to end a democracy isn't to tear it down, but to maintain its outer form while quietly removing its inner substance. In the end, Augustus created something remarkable. A system where people celebrated their freedom while accepting their chains, where they praised democracy while practicing obedience. It was an illusion so perfect that it would shape the course of Western civilization for centuries to come. When Augustus drew his final breath in the year 14 after Christ, having ruled for 41 years, even his enemies had to admit, He had fundamentally transformed the Roman world. But what's truly remarkable isn't just how long he ruled, it's how long his system continued to work after his death. Let me paint you a picture of his legacy. Imagine a world where you could travel from Britain to Egypt without ever leaving Roman territory, where you could use the same coins in Spain that you used in Syria, where roads stretched like arteries across 3 continents, all leading back to Rome. This was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, Augustus's greatest gift to the world. Here's something fascinating. During the Pax Romana, the Mediterranean world experienced a level of peace and prosperity that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. We're talking about 2 centuries of relative stability, an achievement almost unimaginable in the ancient world. Trade flourished, cities grew, and arts and literature reached new heights. Did you know that during this period, Rome's population swelled to nearly 1 million people? It would remain the world's largest city for centuries. Augustus's blueprint for empire proved so effective that it became the template for virtually every emperor who followed. Think of it as the original franchise model for running an empire. Future rulers would all adopt his titles, copy his administrative systems, and most importantly, maintain that careful balance between absolute power and republican appearance. But let me tell you about one of the most interesting aspects of his legacy: the emperor cult. Augustus never claimed to be a god during his lifetime. He was too clever for that. Instead, he allowed people to worship his genius, his divine spirit. After his death, this evolved into full-blown emperor worship, becoming a powerful tool for holding the empire together. Imagine a religion where the head of state was literally considered divine. That's how thorough Augustus's system was. The administrative systems he created were equally impressive. His postal service, the cursus publicus, continued carrying messages across the empire for centuries. His system of Roman provinces became the standard model of territorial administration. Even his method of paying and organizing the army remained largely unchanged for hundreds of years. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked. Augustus established what we might call the first civil service. He created salaried positions for administrators throughout the empire, developing a professional bureaucracy that would keep things running smoothly long after his death. This was revolutionary. Before him, provincial administration had been largely about personal enrichment. The genius of Augustus's system was that it created stability without rigidity. It was flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its core strengths. Think about it. How many political systems can survive for centuries, through good emperors and bad, through plagues and invasions, and still keep functioning? Perhaps most importantly, Augustus created something that people wanted to preserve. His system offered peace, prosperity, and predictability, things that both the elite and common people valued more than abstract political freedom. He showed that people will accept authority if it delivers stability and wealth, a lesson that rulers have applied ever since. Even after the Western Roman Empire fell, Augustus's ghost lingered. Medieval kings claimed to be his successors. The title Caesar became Kaiser in German and Tsar in Russian. Even today, modern leaders still study his methods of maintaining power while preserving popular support. In the end, Augustus created more than an empire. He created a template for how to build and maintain power that would influence politics for the next 2,000 years. His legacy reminds us that the most enduring political systems aren't always the most democratic. They're the ones that best understand human nature and society's deep desire for order, prosperity, and peace. As we close our journey through one of history's most fascinating transformations, let's reflect on what Augustus truly achieved. He didn't just create an empire. He wrote the playbook for political transformation that leaders would follow for the next 2,000 years. Think about what Augustus accomplished. He took a broken republic, torn apart by civil wars and corruption, and transformed it into the most powerful and long-lasting empire the Western world had ever seen. But the truly remarkable part? He did it while convincing people they were becoming more free, not less. Here's a thought that should give us pause. Augustus genuinely believed he was saving Rome. In his famous autobiography, The Res Gestae, he presents himself as a reluctant hero who took power only to protect the Republic. Perhaps he even convinced himself this was true. After all, didn't he bring peace after decades of civil war? Didn't he make Rome greater than it had ever been? But here's the deeper question we need to ask ourselves. When does saving a nation become an excuse for controlling it? Augustus's story shows us how easily the line between preservation and power can blur. He started as a reformer and ended as an emperor, all while maintaining the fiction that he was just another citizen serving the state. Let me share one final fascinating detail about Augustus. On his deathbed, he allegedly asked those around him, "Have I played my part well in the comedy of life?" This single question reveals so much. He knew politics was theater, and he had been its greatest actor. He understood that power isn't just about what you do. It's about how you present what you do. The lessons of Augustus's rise still echo today. We still see leaders who promise to restore past greatness while gathering power. We still see populations willing to trade freedom for security and prosperity. We still see how democracy can be undermined not through force, but through careful manipulation of existing institutions. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: political freedom, once lost, is incredibly difficult to regain. The Romans never restored their republic. The system Augustus created was so effective, so seductive, that it became the template for governance for centuries to come. This story isn't just ancient history. It's a warning, a lesson, and perhaps a mirror to our own times. As you go about your day, think about Augustus and his brilliant political theater. Think about how he transformed a republic into an empire while keeping its outward forms. Think about how easy it is to lose freedom not through conquest, but through comfort. As we wrap up this episode, I want you to consider this. If you lived in Augustus's Rome, would you have seen through his careful illusion? Would you have been one of the few who recognized the republic was ending? Or would you, like most Romans, have celebrated the peace and prosperity while your ancient freedoms slipped away? This is why we study history, not just to understand the past, but to recognize its patterns in our present. If you've found this journey through ancient Rome as fascinating as I have, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button, share this video with others who love history, and subscribe to Imperium Chronicles. Together, we can continue exploring the incredible stories that shaped our world. Remember, history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a teacher, showing us both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human nature. And few stories teach these lessons better than the tale of Augustus, the man who built an empire on illusions and changed the world forever. Until our next historical adventure, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking for the lessons hidden in the past. This is Imperium Chronicles, where history comes alive.